Ready to roll?
Actually, wait.
Nice. I think you should actually fill us both up before you stop.
I did.
I would like a little more. Hello, I'm Izzy.
And I'm Jessica.
And this is
The greatest genre, referring, of course, to fantasy romance.
Oh, yeah.
Outlander, Twilight, The Vampire Diaries,
Think Blood and Ash, Shadow and Bone.
and most importantly, the exhaustive works of Sarah J. Maas.
I think you mean Her Majesty.
Her Majesty Sarah J. Maas, affectionately known as SJM. We have read every single book in the SJM universe. We love them so much, and we cannot wait to relive them and discuss them here with you on this podcast.
That is right. We cannot wait to dive into everything from fairies to fan art. And it's all going to happen right here in my living room on these two sofas. And we're going to talk through A Court of Thorns and Roses, henceforth known as ACOTAR, chapters 1 through 5.
Mm-hmm. And the first half of this and every episode is going to be devoted just to those chapters. We will be dissecting all of the events as they unfold, getting into character development, world building, everything that is happening within those chapters.
Yes, and then the second half is going to be devoted to the wider SJM universe. That means everything here will be on the table. Spoilers, fan theories.
Spoilers abound.
Oh yeah, and arguments, most importantly, about which fictional fae is the hottest.
Yes. And speaking of lusting after fictional men, a reminder that the greatest genre will feature adult content, some adult language. We all know what goes down in the barn with Isaac Hale.
There is literally hay everywhere. We will do our best to keep things PG-13, but you should know that Jessica and I do tend to get carried away, especially when drinking this delightful Argentine Malbec.
A final vibe check before we begin. A reminder to please keep things kind, keep things friendly. One of the things we love the most about this community is how positive it is. We would really like to keep it that way, and we're just so excited to be contributing to it in any way that we can.
Yes, and also, just remember, you literally cannot make fun of us any more than we already make fun of ourselves. Can't do it.
Well, I suppose maybe they could, but there's no need.
Absolutely no
There's just no need. Isabel,
Jessica,
are you ready for our first episode?
I was born ready.
I'm so excited.
I know, me too.
All right, let us go over the wall into Prithian and venture through chapters 1 to 5 of A Court of Thorns and Roses.
Let's do it. So, to begin, we are going to have Jessica run through the chapter 1 through 5 summary of ACOTAR. Would you like to take it away, Jess?
Absolutely. For those of you who did not do your required reading before this episode, here we go. Chapter 1. Feyre, our heroine, is out in the woods, much too close to the Prithian border, I might add.
She's being naughty.
Hunting because her family is on the brink of starvation. She spots a deer and is about to take the shot when a huge wolf appears. Feyre has a brief but very high-stakes internal debate about whether or not the wolf is actually a fairy, ultimately decides to take the chance and shoot the wolf with an arrow made of ash, and then sends another arrow through his eye, killing it, but not before making eye contact with the beast, during which she feels for a moment that he sees her. She skins the wolf, takes the pelt and the deer home, and is determined to leave the whole encounter behind her in the forest, focusing only on the fact that tonight her family will not go hungry.
Yeah, what an opening.
What an introduction to our girl Feyre. Chapter 2 brings Feyre home. She arrives with her kill and the pelt. Her sisters react with apathetic entitlement. Her father at least seems concerned that she put herself in harm's way, but Feyre reminds him that she simply did what was necessary to keep them all alive. The family eats a full meal for the first time in many days. We then have a pretty nasty exchange kick off between Feyre and Nesta when Nesta brings up a boy in the village that she claims is going to propose to her. Elaine makes some feeble attempts at playing peacemaker, but to no avail. The chapter closes with Feyre's father telling her that hope is just as essential as bread and meat, and urges her to let her sisters hope for a better life, a better world To which Feyre responds, "There is no such thing." Are you making fun of my quoting?
No, I love your quoting. I'm literally cackling internally, and I guess maybe a little externally about the fact this is just such a tough look for Feyre's sisters when you first meet them.
It is, and we'll get there.
We're gonna get into
We'll get there,
it,
but I have 3 more chapters to get through.
I am so sorry. I promise I'll be quiet. Like, I promise 80% I'll be quiet.
Okay. Chapter 3. Feyre goes to the market to sell her veils.
Do we have any just go with it sounds out there?
Sorry, Dolph Lundgren came out. I actually typed that in my notes. To sell her veils.
I love it.
Anyway, so Feyre goes to the market to sell the pelts with her sisters. On the way, they have a slightly disturbing encounter with the Children of the Blessed, a cult of people who worship the High Fae as their divine masters. The acolyte tries unsuccessfully to preach to the Archeron sisters, and they continue on down the road. Feyre ends up doing business with a mercenary she has never seen before. She's surprised by the woman's generosity and deeply unsettled by the warning about the fairy attacks that have been happening in human villages. They part ways, and Feyre gives her sisters a little bit of money before sneaking off to shag Isaac Hale in the barn. We warned you it was coming.
And there's hay everywhere.
We can only assume. We are then brought back to the cottage, where the spirits are much improved from the night before. Bellies are full. There is a brief moment of ease and contentment, actually, before it is all shattered when a massive horned beast bursts into the cottage. Chapter 4. The beast, whose feline body, wolfish head, and elk-like antlers strike terror into the entire Archeron family, accuses them of murder and furiously demands to know who killed the wolf. He then explains, with no shortage of disdain for mortals, that the treaty between Prythian and mortal lands demands a life in return for the death of the wolf, who was, in fact, Fae. Feyre confesses to the murder and then asks that the beast kill her outside instead of in her home in front of her family. The beast then explains that the life can be repaid by Feyre coming to live in Prythian as opposed to just her dying. He says that she would be granted permission to live on his lands. Feyre accepts the terms, bids her family goodbye. Her father's final words to her are that if she should ever escape, she should never come back. Just pretty...
Very tough.
That's pretty brutal. Chapter 5, Feyre journeys to the wall. We don't know much about that journey because she is magically drugged to sleep by the beast shortly after they leave the cottage because she's asking him questions.
Tough look for the beast.
Yeah, not great. So she passes out and wakes up as they pass through the gates into Prythian.
And that is where chapter 5 ends.
That is how it ends. Is everybody still with us?
I'm still with you.
Okay, where do we start to unpack this? I think it would be good for us to sort of discuss the world that we're in, right?
I think that's a great idea.
Okay.
So, as in every great fantasy novel, it all begins with a map. So, we're going to throw the map up, so you should see it on your screen. I just kind of want to start with saying, does this look a little bit like the UK to you? I feel like
Just a bit.
I feel like every single fantasy book that I read has a map that looks strangely like the United Kingdom. I mean, Westeros also. I just had to look at this, and like, there's Highburn over there, which is literally the Republic of Ireland.
That makes the Night Court the Scottish Highlands, doesn't it?
And I can't help but think of Jamie Fraser.
I mean, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that SJM has definitely read Outlander.
Oh, 100%.
Like, for sure.
So I think it looks like the Day, Dawn, and Night Court would all be Scotland. And Highburn is Ireland, and Northern Ireland. SJM, please explain yourself.
What is the Spring Court?
And England is the Spring Court. That's because we're all pasty. The Spring and Summer Court are also Wales.
Ah.
How's your knowledge of Great Britain, Jessica?
I'm not. It would. I don't think it's as good as I
There's
thought it
no
was
comment.
till now.
And so it looks like we have the solar courts versus the seasonal courts. And
yes, can you explain? Can you actually spell that out for everyone? really quickly.
So seasonal chords are obviously spring, autumn, winter, summer, and they are all in what looks like the southern hemisphere of Prithian.
Yes.
And then we've got the solar chords, which are day, dawn, and night.
And there is a rather large mountain.
Yes, we are
separating the seasonal quartz and the solar quartz. But the most important thing here, I think, to just take away is that Prithian is really dominating the real estate here. I mean, the mortal lands is just basically nothing.
It seems a little weird to me that, like, okay, look to the right of this map. And
I know.
This massive, I mean, this is where Europe is. Like, I just have a question. Why did they decide to keep this puny little sliver of land at the bottom of Prithian?
Listen, I don't know why anybody would live here. Like, 2 out of 10 would I want to live where Feyre lives.
Yeah, and that also kind of transitions us into the beginning of chapter 1, which is when we start talking about Feyre's actual surroundings in the forest.
Yeah.
And boy, is it tough.
No, transitioning from the macro sort of world building introduction into the micro, SJM paints a very, very clear picture right away that Feyre's world is harsh.
It is bleak.
It's really, really harsh.
But what I love about it is that it still feels like high fantasy. You feel like you have that filter over the camera like they do in Lord of the Rings, where everything is just a little bit sparkly.
And like soft, kind of.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I really like that intro into the chapter.
And it's also interesting that she's alone, right? Mm-hmm. We meet her in this moment where there's no one else around. She is very alone with her thoughts, and it kind of mirrors the isolation that she feels, I think, day to day, no matter where she is. But in this moment, it is just her and the forest and you.
Yeah, and like her survival. And that is another theme that weighs so heavily throughout these first 5 chapters, is that like it is a constant battle just to stay alive.
Yes, I think that's another theme here in this world is survival. You know, she's battling the elements, she's battling things like starvation to stay alive, but you're also hearing kind of right away about how much they fear the Fae, and they're living in fear of the Fae coming and attacking them and just wiping out villages. So it feels like they're just always on the brink of some sort of devastation.
Disaster.
It's very intense.
It is really intense. And also the whole encounter with the wolf, this is like the event that catapults us into the rest of this story.
It's the catalyst for everything that happens afterwards.
Yeah, and so I love that at the beginning of ACOTAR, it is just her solo. You get all of her thoughts, and you get this initial hatred, like with the Fae, and it really paints a pretty, I would say, accurate picture of what the relationship is like between those two populations. They are terrified of fairies.
They are terrified of fairies. That is definitely made very clear. And the way, it's funny, the way that they talk about the fairies when I was first reading the chapters, and in this chapter specifically, the way they describe them actually made me think of vampires.
Interesting.
More than like fae.
I thought of elves.
Like Tolkien,
yeah,
the Tolkien elven
and maybe it was
race.
because I was just coming off of, like, I always rewatch Lord of the Rings in the winter, and I think we started these in February of 2022.
Yes,
and so,
that makes sense.
Yeah, and so I think that I had like Legolas and in my head and Elrond and Galadriel, and I was just thinking that they were very tall elvish beings.
I totally see that, and I think now that is definitely how I imagine them. But when they were first being described in the books, the way they were talking about how they were tall, lethal. There was all these references to them eating humans, very predatorial.
Oh yeah, like deadly, eerie.
Yes, that it very much gave me the Cullens or like the vampires in the Vampire Diaries.
Oh yeah,
kind of a vibe.
Expanding more on this relationship between the Fae and the mortals. We did kind of get introduced in these first 5 chapters to a bunch of, like, rules, so to speak. Like, you always have the rules in your fantasy books. Like, so we think we know that Ash kills fairies. She killed this wolf with an ash. bow.
So she shot 2 arrows. The first arrow she shot was an ash arrow, and it went into its side. And then she fired a second one that went directly through its eye. But that's a really good point to make, because there are always rules. You know, every magic system has its own set of rules, right? And so what we
and you have to stay consistent with them.
Yes, and what we think we know
At
from chapter 1 is that ash is lethal to fairies. We also have learned that they don't like iron, allegedly.
And then that they can't lie.
And that they cannot lie.
Feyre goes out of her way to say a lot, or SJM goes out of her way to write down that, you know, fairies can't lie.
Yes, but I think it's also important to note, she doesn't explicitly say this, SJM, she doesn't write this down, but to me, it seems like most of this is almost more superstition. You know, because it's been so long.
Since any of them have had an actual interaction with a fairy.
Right. It's less history than it is becoming
conjecture.
Myth.
I like that. It's very mystical.
It is very mystical. Everyone's feeling very superstitious about it.
And I think also with that superstition is like when things have happened so long ago. So we know there was this ancient battle, and I think the quote is, it was so bloody it took 6 queens to make a treaty. Right? There was this gargantuan event that happened.
It was an uprising because the humans used to be slaves to the High Fae. And basically what eventually happened was all of the humans rose up against being enslaved, and some of the High Fae actually fought with them. So it was this massive war to liberate human beings from servitude to the High Fae.
But I think that the fact that it happened so long ago, it's almost
again, it's shrouded in myth now.
Yeah.
And so it's less history than it is myth at this point. And so all of these little pieces of history that have filtered down have now become superstitions, essentially.
I will say, one of the things I did notice reading these 5 chapters was that it felt a little bit like it was rushed, this introduction into the tension between
There's a lot of context for context's sake, I think, which is a tough thing to get around when you're in the first couple of chapters of a fantasy series, I think. Because the world building is so important, and you do need to understand the rules and the landscape in which your characters are living.
Yeah, and I guess to me, I would rather hear about the character development a lot more in the first couple of chapters. And then once I know the characters more, then I understand why that internal dialogue is telling me certain things, rather than I felt in the first 5 chapters of this, the internal dialogue, I didn't understand why she was giving me all this information, because I didn't really know her yet, you know?
And it's not necessarily things she would have been
thinking
about
while
she was hunting. She wouldn't be recounting the history of her land to herself.
Yeah. And I'm not saying,
That's fair.
and I appreciated the context, I did. I do think that she does better in later books of not doing that. She shows, doesn't tell. And in this first 5 chapters, I felt like sometimes she was telling me, not showing me.
I think she does a really good job introducing new characters. I think she has
Yeah.
such an incredible way of bringing a new character onto the scene.
So should we talk about when she goes home and we kind of meet her family?
Yes, let's do the family Archeron introductions.
This family...
It's time.
This episode, hello Malbec, is literally meet the family.
Yeah.
And we get a lot out of our first scene with Feyre and Nesta and Elaine and their father.
Yes.
Do you want to go first? Or do you want me to go first? Because I got some things to say.
I will go first, actually.
Okay.
And I would like to start with Feyre, because she is the first character that we meet in these chapters, and she is the most important character throughout this entire book.
Yes.
And I was just so struck by the introduction to her. I think mostly, to be fair, because I was rereading it, and now knowing how her journey unfolds, which of course we're not going to discuss during this portion, but we will discuss it later. I was just struck by how apathetic she is. And it made me so sad, because I realized how isolated she is. And I mentioned it earlier when we were talking about the macro and the micro view of the world that we're dropped into. In that micro view of her surroundings, she is so isolated. She is so alone in this forest. But as she comes home to this place, you know, home is supposed to be a place of comfort, a place where you feel safe, And
She's
I
never
realized
nothing but venom.
she comes home and she is just as alone and just as isolated as she was in the woods.
Can you imagine that? Coming home when you're 19 after
She's the
trying
youngest.
To
She's the youngest member of
which
this
is a
family.
very important note. Trying to feed your entire family, being out in the cold, being able to count your ribs, killing something. Like, you had a
She
day.
skinned it.
And
She
then-
killed it and skinned it.
And then when you come home
Yuck.
and you are basically met with, on Nesta's side, with venom, and on Elaine's side, with...
Well, I don't even know what word you can use for what you're getting from Elaine. I have a lot. You can do Nesta's intro because I have some things to say about Elaine Archeron. Coming back to Feyre, being the youngest member of the family, and this burden of their survival is on her shoulders, and she took it on because on her mother's deathbed, we need to unpack this actually for a second.
I hate her mom.
What?
What
I'm
kind
sorry.
of mom does that?
What the fuck?
Yeah, big woof. It just paints her entire family in, like, her mom in a super unflattering light. Elaine and Nesta as ungrateful. Her father as useless, to be frank. Like, I know that he has limited use of his legs, but
Yes.
there's still a way to be a father without physically being able to help.
Totally agree.
You can emotionally support your kids. This is a quote that I pulled from chapter 2 that really stuck with me. I'd long since given up hope of them actually noticing whether I came back from the woods every evening. That is so sad. Like, Feyre is a very fragmented character in these first 5 chapters.
She is very, very isolated. She is very apathetic. She has completely shut herself off from feeling anything, really.
She's depressed. She's completely depressed.
And I want to go back again to the vow that she made to her mother. So on her mother's deathbed, her mother makes her swear to her to stay together and look after them. Which, again, first of all, like, just a very uncool thing to do to your youngest child.
Yeah.
And Feyre takes this vow very, very seriously because she says, in this world where the gods were long forgotten and there's no religion, a promise is your vow. It is sacred.
Yeah.
And
it's currency.
And she made this promise to her mother, and it is the only thing that she holds on to every day. And I think that's a really important thing to remember about her as the next couple of chapters and even the rest of the whole story plays
and
out.
I'm glad that you said that, because at first when I was rereading these chapters, I was almost irritated at Feyre. I remember the first time reading it being like, why does she not have a spine? And she just accepts the behavior of her family and how they speak to her. And rereading it, I was like, that is not a fair assumption to make. When you are beaten down like that, like physically outside every day, like in the elements,
Yes.
and then you come home and you are emotionally beaten down, there's just a point where you become exhausted. And so I kind of
just turns it off.
Yeah, I
she
kind
has
of did
to shut it all out.
a 180 on Feyre when I was rereading this, and I just really appreciated and felt for her in these first 5 chapters.
Let's dive into the sisters. Talk to me about Nesta.
Off the bat, Nesta, her intro is one of the cruelest, most predatorial, hateful intros I have ever seen. Like, she is mean.
This line that I wrote down, this is the first descriptor we get of Nesta.
Oh my god, give it to me. I'm
Nesta,
so ready.
quote, who had been born with a sneer on her face, end quote. Yikes.
A queen without a throne. Like,
That's
she
another
is
good
proud.
one.
Nesta is proud, and this is like...
I have goosebumps.
No.
You read these lines about Nesta, and I am scared of her.
I'm
I don't
also
want
scared of her.
I don't want her to look at me in any kind of way.
No, she's scary, and she's the oldest, and I'm sorry, but eldest sisters are the backbone of society, and even though Nesta is not being the backbone of this family, there is just always a certain vibe that comes with the eldest sister, and you do not cross them.
Not coming from 2 oldest siblings of their families.
She's angry, bitter, and spiteful, and...
Very bitter. Lots of, I mean, she's dripping with just nastiness.
Disdain. Yeah, she's not, you know what she is? She's a mean, nasty girl.
She is nasty. She is nasty. And not in an Isaac Hale in the barn kind of way.
No, not nasty.
But good, if you ask me.
So should we pivot to Elaine.
She's
kind. She's nice. She's just a bimbo.
That.
I'm looking at your quote here that you have written down.
Hold on, I'm gonna read it.
You have to tell it to everyone.
Quote, Elaine just sometimes didn't grasp things. It wasn't meanness that kept her from offering to help. It simply never occurred to her that she might be capable of getting her hands dirty. End quote.
Woof.
And it continues, quote, I'd never been able to decide whether she actually didn't understand that we were truly poor or if she just refused to accept it.
I mean, it's just very tough.
It's one of those things where, yes, everything we hear about Nesta is like, wow, you are angry and you are mean and you are scary. But I would rather have that than what we've got with Elaine.
Well, because
here.
with Elaine, it almost seems like a void of personality or character or something. Like, at least Nesta, she may be a bitch, but she's fun to read about, I guess.
She's witty and she's sharp and she doesn't miss anything. Like, she's very, very aware of their situation, and she is aware of the fact that she's doing nothing to help, and that is just fine with her.
And scary.
And scary. And Elaine is just like, what?
That's what it is. She's what?
What? What? That's Elaine for you in a sentence. But so I noticed something else. I was rereading to prep for this episode. There's a third quote, and it says, Feyre admits that she has a soft spot for Elaine because Elaine is so helpless, and she says that she would buy flower seeds to bring back for Elaine to plant in their garden. And I stopped, and I thought to myself, excuse me, you all are starving. The seeds that you're buying for a garden that has tillable soil that will grow things are for flowers?
And not for
like a potato?
That you can grow. And potatoes are very resistant.
I really, really think that was a huge missed opportunity by the Archeron family, and Elaine in particular, because if Elaine likes to play in the dirt and grow things, like, grow a frickin' root vegetable.
It's very tough.
Help yourself.
Speaking of...
So that's my rant on Elaine.
As for the father,
I genuinely feel pity for.
I do too. It takes a lot for a man to reach that level of helplessness. I think he feels ashamed a lot of the time, and I think that shame is one of the driving human emotions, and so I can't really...
It's a very powerful one.
It really, really is. And so I didn't really come out of this chapter with a big opinion on her dad.
I think the thing that really jumped out to me about her father is that he just really seems to have given up, and I think your point about shame is such a good one, because shame is a very, very powerful emotion.
It is, and every single person who is listening to this, everyone knows what that feels like.
Yes.
And so, again, like rereading these chapters for the second time, third time, prepping for this, it makes you see her family members in a slightly different light, because when you first read, I think we were so excited when we first read this, like I definitely didn't read it as closely as I should have, and didn't really internalize everything. So moving on to chapter 3, we get to go to the town for the first time, and we enter the children of, so do you say the children of the blessed or the children of the blessed?
I say the blessed.
I say the blessed.
I don't think there's a right or wrong.
So these children of the blessed, fanatic fools who worship the high fae. This is kind of the first introduction into humans that don't hate the fairies, and so far that's all we've experienced.
And they are treated very poorly by their fellow, called lots of horrible names.
And it also just makes me wonder, like, how does one become, like, a fae fanatic when the entire community that you live in hates the fae?
Well, and there's also so little known about them, like we were talking about before. You know, it's so shrouded. Like, when was the last time anyone even saw? It's very interesting to me that everyone still believes that fairies are very, very real, but no one has seen one in so long. And so much of it is now shrouded in mystery.
Yeah.
But no one doubts their existence, which I do think is interesting. And you're either terrified of them and you hate them, or you're this very small, radical offshoot of society who believes that they are benevolent masters.
Yeah. And then I think the most exciting part of this chapter was meeting the mercenary.
That was really exciting to reread. I'm very excited for the spoiler section because I want to get into all the things that she said. And when I read it for the first time, when you read it for
throwaway character for me the first time.
And when you read it for the first time, you think you do get important context. So on the surface level, you are getting all of this really rich information about what is going on around us, and you start to feel fear about something that is coming.
About this interaction was because
it was a natural event that was happening, that was giving you and the character information that you both needed in the same moment, but for different reasons.
Yes, exactly. And then I thought it was kind of funny. Feyre felt like a parent giving her kids money to like go away and like do something while she goes off to shag Isaac Hill in the barn.
Shag Isaac Hill in the barn.
So we know Feyre is sexually active.
Very naughty! You know, and I think, again, this just goes back to her isolation. She feels so alone, and these stolen moments that she has with Isaac is just, I think she's just really craving some kind of human connection.
Yeah, and I did notice that while rereading this, it was like you are the closest you can physically get to someone while you are having sex. She is emotionally like completely cut off from him.
Yeah, she doesn't feel anything
while that's happening.
That's again so sad.
Really sad. Yeah. Loving that she has contraceptive tea.
It's really important that everyone is using protection in the fantasy realm.
And like,
again, rules, world building that we are getting. This is a rule. But this is the way things work in the fantasy world because it's fantasy. And this is one of the reasons we love fantasy, because you don't have to abide by the rules of this world.
And it's not even just this world. This is a rule in all fantasy tropes. In this genre, there is always a contraceptive tea of some sort. That's true,
yes. I mean, you can even look at House of the Dragon.
Yes!
Moon tea.
Moon tea.
Moon tea, it's always a tea.
It is literally always, because tea is just, it's very witchy, isn't it? A cup of tea.
It is very witchy. A cup of tea. A brew. I did have to have a little giggle. I was like, yes.
The tea.
The tea.
Do you think we're in like medieval time? Because I imagine this as being...
My dad asked me this actually last night. I was like, I'm so excited. We're filming our podcast tomorrow. And he was like, so is it like Vikings era?
And the answer is, I don't actually know.
I actually think I am picturing something a little bit more like the Last Kingdom era.
I'm thinking like burlap peasant blouses.
Yeah.
That kind of situation. I mean, listen, it's funny because there's no running water. And there's not electricity. But there's contraception. So they eventually get back to Feyre's home. And this is when we finally get the beast bursting forth from...
I'm sorry. Now that we're talking about the beast, I could barely rein it in during the summaries. We have to acknowledge the beast in the room.
Yes.
And by that I mean the Beauty and the Beast trope in the room.
ACOTAR is listed as a young adult fantasy play on Beauty and the Beast.
Yes, because it has become a little bit of a trope.
Yeah.
Yes.
And in the spoiler section, we'll go into all the reasons.
Yes.
Why this is partially true and partially not true. It was just very, very funny with the feline form bursting into the house and the elk horns.
I have tried so many times to go bit by bit and put this creature together in my head. And it's just still very tough. Because elk horns don't spiral. And I'm sorry, the small child in me that read animal encyclopedias for fun is coming out the same way when people say lions are the king of the jungle. Like, they don't live in the jungle!
You heard it here.
They don't. There are species of African antelopes who have spirally horns. But they are not elk.
Okay, this was an interesting scene, though, because as kind of chaotic and scary as it was, there was one quote that I really liked, which was Feyre thinking, I knew with a sudden uncoiling clarity that Nesta would buy Elaine time to run.
That is a very cool moment. Like, she's
And-
having all of this fear and stress, but all of a sudden she's like, okay, I know at least Elaine is going to have time to run because Nesta will make sure of it.
And I thought that was a very interesting little tidbit, which we can talk more about.
And once again, I just have to say, a tough look for Elaine, because at least Nesta, like, grabs her sister and pulls her behind her and is, like, gonna go down fighting
and
first.
I had this
And
visual
you
in my head
still see Elaine just, like...
of Elaine just looking around, being like, What's happening? A lot of focus on the jade eyes with the Beast.
Yes.
And you just always know in these books when there is focus on something's eyes or someone's eyes that it's going to be trouble down the line. I don't even feel like
No
that's a spoiler.
spoilers.
That's not a spoiler.
I
It's if you read the blurb.
certainly had a hunch of maybe what was coming when I read it, but I'm not going to say in this moment.
In that case, I'll redirect my thoughts. And then we get to the physical journey to the wall, which starts in chapter 5.
Yes, I did also want to note, they exit the cabin, the hut, and there is a horse there, saddled already, which I find, Isabel, to be very interesting, because it would seem to me that if a beast traveled all this way with a horse saddled, that he was always intending on returning with someone who would need to be on horseback.
Well, he is intending on returning with her because...
No, it's interesting because originally he comes in and he's all acting like he's going to kill whoever killed the wolf. It's a loophole. The treaty demands a life for a life. He finds the loophole, and I just think it's very interesting. It would seem to me that that was always the intent, which is a stark contrast to the picture that has been painted of the Fae.
The first clue that we get that the Beast is not as fearsome as we think is that the horse clearly respects him.
Feyre says it seems like the horse bows to the Beast before she climbs aboard.
Exactly.
You definitely start to pick up on these clues that this Beast is not... All is not what it seems.
There was definitely a lot of that in these first 5 chapters.
Yes. Also, and just a hilarious final note that the Beast magically sedates Feyre for the entire journey because he just doesn't want to talk to her.
I mean,
she's very nice.
Well, I mean, how her social skills maybe haven't been put to
okay, but
the
all
test.
she
a
did
lot
was
over the
ask
last
him
6
if
years
he
while
had a name.
That's fair. That's a good point.
Do you have a name? And he just knocks her out.
Very, very tough look.
It's a little bit rude.
We do actually, another important note is that we do discover that magic smells and tastes metallic-y.
Yes. Yes. She has a faint metallic taste on the roof of her mouth, I think is the way she describes it. And then there is just nothing. So, a fitting way to close, I think.
And now, this is your warning to turn off the
Warning!
podcast.
If you have not read past chapters 1 through 5 of A Court of Thorns and Roses, if you do not want spoilers about A Court of Thorns and Roses, Throne of Glass, or Crescent City, please exit the podcast now. Please come back for the next episode. But please, please, please stop listening now. We are about to spoil so many things.
Let's begin.
Okay, great.
Oh, wow. The foreshadowing in these chapters, Jessica.
It's so crazy, and it's also so hard for me not to call the Beast Tamlin. It's really, really tough.
But we did well. We have not said the name Tamlin once.
That's great. I'm super proud of us.
Give me that. I first of all want to talk about the paint that covers the cottage.
Go for it.
I didn't even notice the first time reading this through, until Rise said everything, that was the situation.
Because the painting is boring. The painting is boring.
Okay.
I'm sorry. When I read it for the first time, I was like, okay, she paints.
Thank you so much, because I was rereading these. I'm trying to be emotionally invested in the painting because I know it's a really big part of Frost and
Maybe
Starlight.
it's just because you and I aren't
painters.
artists.
But what artists in other ways?
But think about how much Nesta loves music and loves to dance. Like, what if we were in Nesta's head and she was out in the forest and she was like, I forgot what it was like to just be filled with a piece of music. That is something that you and I would absolutely
understand.
connect to and be moved by. I think, unfortunately, it's just because I've never been a painting art person that I really struggled to connect with her on that front.
Me too, and yet again, another instance of me feeling like SJM was telling me, not showing me, that I should care about this part of Feyre's personality. And it is such a huge part of her world.
It is.
Later on in the books.
It
and
is.
we learn that this is kind of what saves her in a way. Like, this is where she finds peace. And I'm just reading it being like, I don't care.
I'm like, okay, she painted the dresser. That's really sad. She has no friends and nothing else to do, so she paints stuff.
But we love that it is a starry sky.
It's the flames for me.
It's the flames.
Are we gonna talk about the flowers on Elaine's drawer? Because
I think that they speak for themselves. I don't even know if we need to talk about it.
I can't get into that right now, or we're
we
going to be
didn't
on
even
here for
touch
another
on
hour.
the fact that Feyre is illiterate. I know that it will. It was
Sorry.
I know that it will show up in the next few chapters.
It's not
so
funny.
We have time, but this does play a part in her role under the mountain and in later books.
Yeah.
So
well, the only clue you get really is when Nesta calls her an ignorant peasant.
oh my god,
which is
Nesta is so
mean. She's so mean.
She's such a bitch. I love her.
I do too. Yeah, Silver Flames was an incredible journey. That character development was
Unreal.
Truly stunning.
Unreal.
And
SJM did it again.
I'm holding out hope that she can do the same thing for me and Elaine.
And do you know what I'm thinking? I'm thinking that maybe since we haven't had Elaine's point of view book yet, hopefully we get it. We didn't love Nesta before we read Silver Flames. Like she did.
I
she
didn't
had
love
a
Nesta,
character
but I
arc
was
in
at
Wings and
least-
Ruin. We had some emotional investment in her. We haven't had really anything like that with Elaine yet, which is maybe why when you're rereading it and you're looking for things to attach yourself to and be invested in, I'm still struggling with her. Maybe because this hasn't been finalized yet.
I mean, I'm struggling mostly with Elaine because she has jilted Lucian for Grayson? Is that his name?
I think it is Grayson. It's very tough.
Who, like, what? How dare you?
Other foreshadowings that we get our first mention of Claire Better.
Oh,
But
yes,
that was
I did notice
And
that. I was
had
like,
no. And it's so funny. SJM loves to drop these little Easter eggs. You just
she
have
is the
no
Easter
idea.
egg queen. Every day is Easter when you're reading an SJM book.
But I think the thing we really want to talk about in this foreshadowing section is the mercenary.
I do want to talk about the mercenary.
Oh my god. When she says up to you, girl, I just about had a coronary. I was not okay.
Okay, but Tamlin also calls her girl in the beast form.
Not really. He says it once and that's it. Like, for me, it was her description of her features and the whole mystique that went hand in hand with that character. Like, where does she come from? How does she know all this stuff? How has she survived? How has she survived this illness? And then she goes, up to you, girl. And I'm like, oh, it's Amryn. I mean, it's not Amryn, but do you know what I mean? I
Yes.
just, like, my little antenna just went, wee!
It's so funny that you immediately jumped there because my mind immediately jumped to Crescent City for some reason.
What were you thinking of?
It made me think of Fury.
Fury, yeah.
And when I read it again last night, I actually thought of the bite that Bryce has on her leg because the mercenary was bit.
Yeah.
And she says, because I read it a couple of times, she said that she battled a fairy that was nothing like a Martax. She says it was much darker, much more terrifying. And it made me think of the demons from hell.
Oh.
And when Bryce got bit by the poisonous demon, the poison stayed in her leg. And this mercenary...
Oh my god, I just got chills.
And this mercenary has spidery black... And she's like, yeah, the healers told me the poison is just there. Like, I've healed, but the poison is still there. and it made me
Oh my God.
it made me think of the demons from hell. I don't think it is Fury anymore, but that was something that popped into my head at first.
Yeah, because the way that she describes the mercenary physically is not the same
It's
as
not
Fury.
the same as Fury Star.
Actually, another thing that I just thought of, that very first chapter when Feyre is just kind of existing in the woods and the snow is kind of gently falling. It's becoming night. That starry night just reminded me of this kind of still, peaceful.
That's so interesting. No, I love that.
It just kind of reminded me of that feeling that she feels when she's with Rose.
I think I like that. I had a similar moment where I was contrasting that scene, and particularly the scene where she talks about it had been so long since I had allowed myself to appreciate anything beautiful, you know, and she's talking about, you know, new grass coming through the snow, or even like snow falling in the woods. It made me think of Starfall. Because that's really the first moment where we get to experience Feyre feeling joy for the first time ever, really. Because when she's in the spring court with Tamlin, she's shocked by everything, and she's certainly awed by everything. She does start to feel happiness, and she does start to feel lighter. But the only other moment, really, there is a moment, I think, at Midsummer, where she gets very drunk, and she has this moment of euphoria. But it's
different.
It's the effects of the wine, really, that are happening. Starfall is really the first moment where you get to be with her as she marvels at this beautiful, incredible, and she is moved, and she feels joy, and she is so deeply emotionally affected by this beautiful, joyful thing that she's experiencing. And so to me, it was such a stark contrast to the apathy that she has forced herself into to survive in this moment in her life.
I think that's why that sometimes I can forgive the internal dialogue that I don't fully understand moments, because when we get those moments where SJM is just so good at conveying to the reader the core emotions of what a character... I mean, how many times have you cried reading all of her books? Countless.
I can't, Throne of Glass, with Kingdom of Ash, I just wept basically from start to finish. Oh my God.
So many times, like the moments when her characters have those moments of clarity and those big emotional shifts, everyone, whether or not it's the same situation that you've been, you know what that feels like, to have that big emotional moment where something in your core being turns on its axis and you are changed. And she is so good at writing about that.
I totally agree, and I think that's one of the incredible things about the fantasy genre, is that so much of it is allegory, and through these characters, they're experiencing all the same emotions we experience, but for some reason, when you experience them through a character that is completely and totally removed from your version of reality, you're a little bit freer to just feel those things.
Oh, I love the way you put that.
And it's so cathartic, you know?
Yes, it is. It is cathartic.
It's really cathartic to read about it. Because there's no pressure, and
you
you're
know
not
what it also
expected.
is?
You're not expected to explain why you feel a certain way about this. You're just having a moment with these characters, and you're experiencing these human emotions.
And you know what it also is? It is because everything you are just saying is happening, and it's also escapism.
Yeah.
It allows you to feel all of that in a world that is not your own.
Yes. It takes the pressure. It takes the pressure off.
And you and I, who were both living in La La Land for our entire childhood, and finally we have La La Land for adults, and then we also have a healthy way of expressing our emotions while we're reading something.
Sometimes fantasy is just better.
It really is. Mortal men just don't do it for me anymore.
Listen, mortal men ain't shit.
You heard it here first.
I stand by that.
One thing we did notice as well, just to give yourself some little food for thought, Elaine is an anagram for Aelin.
When I saw that on TikTok, I had to, like, lie down. Because as much as I really sort of don't fuck with Elaine, I live for Aelin Galantinius.
So, for those of you that are new, which is everyone, unless you've watched our trailer, Jessica literally is Aelin. I was
Let me
reading...
make something very clear. I've never wielded a sword.
So, you've wielded verbal swords.
Okay, but I could never take anyone in a fight, and I feel like Aelin's physical abilities are a very big part of who she is.
That's true. You leave that to me.
And I could never... I'm not a fighter, physically.
Yeah.
I think about ways to inflict long-term damage
Let me
strategically
rephrase that. Let me
upon
rephrase
people,
this.
upon my enemies.
And that is why you are Aelin. What you just said right there.
And we're both stunningly beautiful women.
Exactly.
If you've made it this far in this episode, first of all, we love you.
Congratulations.
Second of all, our vision for this podcast, long term, is that we will go roughly 5 chapters at a time, all the way through the ACOTAR series, all the way through Crescent City, 2 books, and then all the way through Throne of Glass.
So strap in, folks. You're in for a long ride. And with that, Jessica, should we wrap up? Really, really appreciate you guys listening. We had the best time.
This
Drunk.
is so much fun. We got a little tipsy. We got to talk about our favorite books. We're so excited to hear from you all, your thoughts, your feelings, your predictions. And we will be back very soon with our next episode.
In the spring court. Let's go.
Woo!
All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll talk to you soon.
Next time.